Okay, kids, the key to this whole thing is going to be paying attention to the timeline. This is very much in chronological order, and it'll be crucial that you understand it in chronological order. If you look at your ID sheet that I gave you, basically what I did instead of subtopics is I went by day, so you kind of understand that, because this is a very detailed time. Now, the overall topic here is going to be the presidency of John F. Kennedy, Part 2, the Cuban Missile Crisis. And this Cuban Missile Crisis is an interesting time in American history. And the first subtopic is October 14, 15, 1962, setting up the crisis. How this thing came about in the first place. Now, to preface this, remember we're in a Cold War, right? We're real paranoid about the Soviet Union. We're paranoid about the race for space and them being able to send Sputnik into space. And it's a Cold War where nuclear weapons are being made and those types of things. And there's a concern that if we have another third world war, that would be the one that would end all wars. In other words, it might end civilization because of the nuclear weapon. So both the United States and the Soviet Union have been keeping pretty good eyes on each other during this Cold War, because we're concerned about the situation in Berlin, we're concerned about a lot of communist movement, and we just have a little bit of an American paranoia towards that. The Bay of Pigs really didn't do anything to help that, did it, really? Did that help our confidence when we bungled that? So Kennedy is still suffering from the botched Bay of Pigs, and people are still questioning whether his inexperience and age is going to be an issue. Well, on October 14th and 15th of 1962, we set up what we know as the Cuban Missile Crisis. And this crisis involved not only the two most powerful countries in the world, which was the United States of America and the Soviet Union, but it also matched up the two most powerful leaders in the world, which would be President Kennedy of the United States and Nikita Khrushchev of the Soviet Union. So you got the two biggest players here involved in this crisis. And we're going to tell you how this crisis began. And it all started on Sunday, October 14, 1962. So this crisis had involved the two most powerful countries in the world, the United States of America and the Soviet Union, and also the two most powerful leaders in the world, President Kennedy of the United States and Nikita Khrushchev of the Soviet Union, all began on Sunday, October 14, 1962. And here's how it started. Major Richard Heiser, who's on your ID sheet, left Edwards Air Force Base in California en route to Cuba in his U-2 spy plane. So on this date of October 14, 1962, Major Richard Heiser left Edwards Air Force Base in California en route to Cuba in his U-2, which is on the board, spy plane. What in the world was he doing? What was he going to do? What was he going to do on, what was his mission? To spy on who? Cuba. So at 7:31 a.m., Heiser crossed the coastline of Cuba and photographed the 52 kilometers of the island in 12 minutes. So at 7:31 a.m. on Sunday, October 14, 1962, Major Richard Heiser left Edwards Air Force Base in California en route to Cuba. He arrived at the island at 7:31. He crossed the coastline of Cuba at that time, and he photographed the 52 kilometers of the island. It took him 12 minutes to photograph that island. So he takes off early in the morning, Sunday, October 14th. At 7:31 a.m., he crossed the coastline of Cuba and starts his camera up, and he photographs the 52 kilometers of the island. It takes him 12 minutes. Departs Cuba, lands in southern Florida, and turns his film over to members of the CIA. Okay? Does his filming, turns away from Cuba, lands his U-2 plane in southern Florida, at an Air Force base there, and he turns his film over to members of the CIA. Pretty routine, that thing I just told you. That's pretty routine. They do that a lot. Okay? It's a routine mission. Does that airplane have any weaponry on it? No, it's totally a photographic plane. That's what it does. So that happened on Sunday. So what do you think they did Monday, October 15th? They developed those photographs, and when they took a look at them, they were absolutely shocked. So on Monday, October 15th, these photographs that were taken the day before were developed, and they provided shocking results. Now these photographs, after being developed, were studied by several men, one of those being Michael Davis. So these photographs on the 15th were studied by several men. One of those men was a fellow by the name of Michael Davis. And when Michael Davis looked at these photographs, he found out that they clearly showed long circular objects measuring 65 to 100 feet long. So according to Michael Davis, one of the several men who studied the photographs clearly showed long circular objects measuring 65 to 100 feet long. And where were those? On the ground in Cuba.
How long were they?
Okay, so according to Michael Davis, one of the several men who studied the photographs clearly showed long circular objects measuring 65 feet to 100 feet long. Well, another fellow that was looking at the photographs by the name of Dino Brubioni, another fellow by the name of Dino Brubioni, made the determination that these long circular objects were Soviet SS-4 medium-range ballistic missiles. I'll repeat this. So Davis figures out they're long circular objects that measured from 65 to 100 feet long. Dino Brubioni determined that these objects were Soviet SS-4 medium-range ballistic missiles. They were determined that these objects were Soviet SS-4 medium-range ballistic missiles. Not good to have medium-range Soviet ballistic missiles on the ground in Cuba. But you know what the range of a medium-range ballistic missile was? How far it could travel? What do you want to guess? About 2,000 miles. So these medium-range ballistic missiles, these Soviet SS-4 missiles that they saw on the ground in Cuba had a range of 2,000 miles. Now when you're 99 miles from Key West, Florida to Cuba, you would be concerned that the Cubans had a missile that would go 2,000 miles, because the only city in the United States, major city in the United States that they could not reach would be Seattle. Okay? So you think about that. Well, the director of this, you don't have to write this down, just listen. The CIA had a program called the National Photographic Interpretation Center. That's what these guys did. They worked for the National Photographic Interpretation Center. Well, they all have a boss, right? So somebody heads up the CIA's National Photographic Interpretation Center. That guy's name was Art Lundell. Art Lundell was the director of the NPICA, which you really don't need to write down. You just need to understand that the CIA had a special department that interpreted photos from these spy missions. That was the department. And the leader of that CIA department was Art Lundell. So Davis sees the pictures first, and he's going, uh-oh. And he gets a hold of Dino Brubioni, and he determines that these are Soviet SS-4 medium-range ballistic missiles with a capability of shooting 2,000 miles. So then they bring Art Lundell into the picture, who's the head of the department, and he looks at the photographs, and he looks at Davis and Brubioni and says, this is trouble. real trouble. I mean, right away, they know they have a huge problem here. So Davis sees them first, Brignone sees them second, and he's the one that determines what they are. They talk to Art Lundell, who's the director of the CIA's National Photographic Interpretation Center. And when Lundell sees them, he goes, "This is trouble, real trouble."
What was the thing called?
You know, you just put NPIC. That's good enough. It's not important. It's just a department of the CIA that all they do is interpret these photographs that are taken from these spy missions. So, the CIA's thinking, where in the world did Cuba get these Soviet missiles? Well, there was no question where they got them. They got them from the Soviet Union. Okay? So that's a huge issue for us. So that's what happens on Sunday and Monday, October 14th and 15th, is the guy takes the routine, the major takes the routine scoping of Cuba, photographs the island, brings the pictures back. Monday they develop them. They're going, oh my God, we've got long circular objects between 65 and 100 feet long. They determine they're Soviet missiles with a range capability of 2,000 miles that are laying on the ground in Cuba. And now we've got what we call a crisis. Okay? So that takes us to the first real day of the crisis. There's a book called 13 Days that Robert Kennedy wrote about this crisis. And that's what 13 Days in October is what it's also called, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Well, Tuesday, October 16th, 1962 was the official first day of the 13 days that we're talking about. Okay? So Tuesday, October 16th is the first day of the official beginning of 13 days as we speak about in history. And here's how the day goes. At 9 a.m., President Kennedy called his brother Bobby and asked him to come to the White House. At 9 a.m. on Tuesday, October 16th, 1962, the first day of the issue we know as the 13 Days of October, President Kennedy calls his brother Bobby and asks him to come to the White House. And what do you think President Kennedy tells Bobby? Tells him about these missiles that are found. But they haven't been officially briefed yet. Okay? That happens at 11:45 a.m. in the cabinet room. So at 9 a.m. on Tuesday, President Kennedy calls his brother Bobby, asks him to come to the White House. Obviously, when Bobby reaches the White House, he says, "We got an issue here, and we're going to be briefed by the CIA at 11:45 a.m." And at 11:45 a.m. in the cabinet room, Marshall Carter of the CIA gave a formal presentation to President Kennedy and several members of his cabinet on these findings from the day before. So again, at 9 a.m. on Tuesday, President Kennedy calls his brother Bobby and asks him to come to the White House. He informs Bobby on the little bit that he knows about the crisis and tells Bobby that they will be briefed at 11:45 a.m. At 11:45 a.m. in the cabinet room, Marshall Carter of the CIA gives a formal presentation to President Kennedy and several members of his cabinet. So here's what Carter tells Kennedy about officially. First of all, there's missiles in Cuba. Second of all, there are missile launching pads being constructed in Cuba. So he informs President Kennedy that there are missiles in Cuba on the ground, and he also informs the President and his cabinet that there are missile launching pads in Cuba. And he also mentions to the President the capability or distance that those missiles, when they become operational, can cover, and the danger that the United States is in. So Carter of the CIA informs the President about the missiles on the ground in Cuba. He also informs them on the missile launching pads that are being constructed in Cuba. And he explains that the distance of those missiles could reach every major city in America from there, except Seattle. Now, I want to make this point clear so you understand. At this point, these missile launching pads are not operational. That's a term you're going to hear a lot of. What does it mean if they're not operational? They can't be used to launch the missiles. Okay, so right now the crisis is bad, but would it be worse if those missile launching pads were already constructed and were operational, were ready to shoot? That's one advantage we're going to have here, is that the missile launching pads are not yet operational. So we caught them at a good time, right, where action could be taken. So President Kennedy listens to this, and he decides he's going to organize a committee to explore the options on what to do about these missiles in Cuba. So Kennedy's going to organize a committee. He's going to organize a committee. You will need to write this down. Here's what the committee's name was officially called at the time, and still is referred to in history. Here is Kennedy's committee to try to work out solutions for the crisis in Cuba. It was called the Executive Committee of the National Security Council. The official name of that committee that Kennedy put together was called the Executive Committee of the National Security Council. Executive Committee of the National Security Council. Now, do you think Kennedy wanted to repeat that? Hey, we're going to have a meeting of the Executive Committee of the National Security Council. So he trimmed it down to a nickname, which was XCOM. And this is the last time you'll ever have to remember the Executive Committee of the National Security Council. We'll go from this point calling it XCOM. So we talk about the XCOM committee. We're talking about the committee that President Kennedy put together. Now, last thing I want to talk about today, I want you to think about, is what type of people would Kennedy put on this committee, Emily? Who would he put on there? You're President Kennedy, you know what's going on. Who are you going to put on your committee? What type of people? Okay, you're going to put, very good, you're going to put cabinet members. Okay, you're going to put some, but not all, some of your cabinet members, especially your Secretary of Defense. And who else might be in that cabinet? We'll talk about Secretary of State. Those are two keys, but he'll have others. But he will have cabinet members. Jacob, who else might you put on there? What?
I don't know, brother.
Well, that's going to be, he's part of his cabinet because he's the Attorney General, but that's a good point. Well, who else would you put?
Somebody who knows something about.
Very good. You want military leaders. You're going to want some military leaders on there. So you're going to want members of your cabinet, and you're also going to want military leaders. And what did you say?
Somebody who knows something about military.
Okay, military leaders. Who else might you have on there? Possibly. Good. Possibly. Who else might you have? Maybe other people that have been around the block with the Cold War and could give you some good advice. But you're right, CIA, we'll talk about that. But he also is going to get some other people, other government officials that he thinks might have some expertise in that area or have some influence in that area. Tomorrow we'll tell you who he chose for his XCOM committee, and it might surprise you. Okay? So he's going to put a committee together known as XCOM, and I'm going to tell you about who the members of XCOM are tomorrow.
Can I guess?
You can guess.
Well, they're on the ID sheet.
Yeah,